Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we're going to make some fun coffee and tea themed cards using supplies from our sponsor, Top Flight Stamps. You can find them online at topflightstamps.com, and they scour the world looking for the coolest stamps to bring back to us here in America. And the stamps we're going to use today are from Katzelcraft. They're one of my favorite stamp companies, and they come from France. And we're actually going to be using this set here because I really love that big travel coffee cup and also some of the sentiments. And I'm also going to use this one here with all the sweets and the teacups. Look how fun those are going to be to color. But we're actually going to do some paper piecing today, so it's going to be even quicker. They also have this set with some coffee themed stamps that I'll be using in a couple of weeks. And I love this one with the coffee and tea ladies. Aren't they fun? They've got some sweets, and I just love, that'd be a perfect card to send to your girlfriend. So we'll be using these coming soon, and we're going to use these today. The other new product I want to introduce you to are these new embossing powders. They are baked texture, and the two colors that I picked up were Chunky Rust and Patina Oxide, and they're both very different, and they're quite a bit different than other embossing powders. In fact, you might have a little you might have some questions about using them if you are trying them out for the first time. So I decided to do a little experimenting before I turn the camera on, and I'm going to show you what these look like on their own first. So this Chunky Rust texture, baked texture embossing powder has like a flocking in it, and also some regular embossing powder, and then some chunkier pieces. So what you end up with is this mixture of dull and shiny, and you almost get like a fuzzy texture, but it looks rough. So it's kind of weird because you look at it and it looks rusty, so you expect it to be rough, but it's actually a little soft because of like the flocking texture that's in there. This is absolutely gorgeous. This Patina Oxide, it's got a beautiful metallic sheen. It doesn't really look that much like patina to me because it's a little more uniform. But what I figured out is if I mix these two together, I can get a really lovely rusty, rustic effect. So I tried it both ways. I tried it this way, doing the Chunky Rust first and then sprinkling the Patina Oxide on top, and that looked all right, but it almost looked a little bit too overtaken by rust. So when you're choosing what to do, use the powder that you want to be more prominent first. And that's what I did here. I used the Patina Oxide first and then sprinkled on a little Chunky Rust, and I like this effect a lot better. This is what I'm going to show you how to do, but like I said, this was just the Patina Oxide on its own, this was just Chunky Rust on its own, and these two are the combinations. Whichever one you use first, whichever powder you use first, is going to be your more dominant result. So what you're going to do is first emboss a piece of cardstock, and you can use any color cardstock, but I would recommend a darker color like a brown or a black. I prefer to use an embossing folder that has an all-over design that has a lot of like a lot of open space, and I use the reverse side, so I end up with a lot of these flat raised areas, and then I've got the finer lines. And depending on how much you ink it up, you may even be able to keep your inner lines free, but that's up to you. I also found that Versamark works better than a generic embossing powder, embossing pad. This is my, you know, cheapo 99-cent embossing pad that I refill with glycerin. This smoked when I was using that the Chunky Rust powder, so the Versamark's going to work a little bit better for you if you have it. If not, just be prepared for some smoky embossing powder. So I'm just going to go ahead and give it a nice coating so that my powder can stick everywhere, since I'm doing a background. And sometimes it helps to kind of twist the pad a little bit, just to make sure you are making contact and leaving the residue behind. So you can see I've got a little bit of a shine there. And I'm going to cover up my ink pad so I don't get that powder in there. And I'm going to begin by putting on the bottom layer. Now, because there's so many different little chunks in here, it can settle. So what I recommend is actually make sure you have a piece of paper underneath, or you've got it in a tray. Really pour a bunch out there. You want to have that kind of mixing around. It's especially important if you use the Chunky Rust for a background, because those heavier pieces can settle and the flocking can raise up. And then you want to tap off the excess, because otherwise it will blow off and you'll just waste it. Okay, and then if you got your finger anywhere, then you will need to go in there and just kind of get those areas. Now, I recommend you let your heat tool heat up for a second before you begin to heat your panel to make sure that it's ready to go. So I'm just going to let this heat up for a minute, and well, not a full minute, but maybe like 20 seconds to make sure it's nice and hot. Alright, now if you are working on with a Chunky Rust or any other one that has the flocking in it, I'm not sure what the other ones contain, you want to heat it from below, because otherwise you'll just blow that flocking away. But with this patina, I found you can heat it from above because it's more of a traditional embossing powder. But there you can see it kind of melt. It will melt a little quicker if you go from above. But I just wanted to give you that tip about heating it from below in case you are using a baked texture powder that has that fluffy flocking in it. Now you might think it's foolish that I left this pile of embossing powder out while I was heating this up. The reason I did that is because when I touch different areas of the panel, I would end up knocking off that embossing powder, and I'd just have to scoop it up in there and I could reheat it. I wouldn't be able to stop, unscrew a cap, pour it out, and keep the heat gun going. So that's why I did that. And now I'm going to return it to the jar. Now, if you were using the chunky rust, you'll notice you'll have a hard time getting it back in the jar because that will expand. This even wants to expand a little bit, so you might need to tap it down a little bit to get all of your powder back in when you're done. It's crazy. Now, I would also recommend, if you're doing a piece of paper or a coffee filter or something like that to collect your embossing powder, switch it out when you go to a different color because you don't want to cross-pollinate those colors. Alright, so before I use the rust, I'm giving it a nice shake. I want to try to mix up that powder as much as possible. Since this is a new jar, it's going to take, you know, it's going to be hard to shake around because it's so full. So now what I'm going to do is I want to put this kind of rusty texture on there, but I just want it to kind of be here and there. So what I figured out worked really well for this is to take a little spray bottle. Now this is my homemade dye ink refresher, which is glycerin and water. It's about, I filled this up almost all the way with water, and then I put maybe a teaspoon of glycerin in there. And what I'm going to do is just kind of give it a little bit of a spray. Okay, not a lot. And then I am going to use the end of this paintbrush here to flick some of that on. I don't want to do too much because I would like to just kind of catch that embossing powder that I've put out, and I really don't like to put it back in where I've done something really wet like that because I don't want to introduce like a bead of moisture into this jar. That's usually what kills your embossing powders, and especially because I don't know what the makeup is, specifically of these baked enamels. I want to make sure I don't get any, you know, foreign objects in any of the jars that could affect it down the road. So I would just toss that. Alright, and so now I don't know if I'll be able to heat it from above. I think it might blow the flocking powder that's in there away, so I'm going to heat it from underneath. And you're not going to get as much of a shiny result from this as you did from the patina because of the flocking that is in this mix. It's meant to look grungy and rusty, and it does a really good job at that. If you want to add more, I would just kind of maybe use your fingers and just add a pinch here and there where you want it, while the powder's still hot, and see if you can get it to trap into the surface that way. And I'm going to sprinkle the excess on there. I also found that using a Teflon mat versus a silicone mat when you're embossing is helpful because silicone grabs your powder particles and it's really difficult to clean. So you can almost kind of paint with it just by picking up and pinching little bits of powder and adding it where you want that color and texture. Like that would probably blow off, so I've got to heat that from underneath, and I'm going to make sure I grab a different part of the panel so I don't burn my fingers. It also helps to use the rusty one over another powder because you can remelt the other powder and it can help hold it. Because of the flocky texture in there, it doesn't have as much adhesion as the as like a pure embossing powder. You can see how it kind of takes the shine off of the patina color and gives you that kind of oxidized metal look. Alright, and there is that panel. We got a little bit of both textures going on, and of course you can add more of one or the other depending on your preferences. Now I'm going to use brown archival ink because it's waterproof, and I want to actually use some of my distress crayons for some coloring because I hardly ever use them, and I think this might be a really good project for them. And I am going to stamp this coffee cup, the teacups and macaroons on every color here. Now I just dug these out of my scrap bin because I thought it'd be fun to use some stuff up, and also I thought these pastel colors would look great on the macaroons. By having these stamped on all the different shades of paper, we'll be able to cut them apart, paper piece them, and mix and match them together for a huge batch of cards with very little effort. Next, you want to cut apart all of the elements on the paper here. If you have something with an inside piece that needs to be cut out, like these teacup handles, I recommend doing that first before you cut out the teacups themselves. That'll just make it a little bit easier. Then after you cut out the inside parts, you're going to cut out every single element. So instead of keeping this one group of 3 teacups, we're actually going to cut each teacup apart. We're going to cut apart the macaroons from each other, like in that cluster. So we have 3 macaroons, and we're going to cut the lid and the cup part separate. You want to do that to all the pieces that you stamped, and then we can mix and match and build our cards. So here are all the pieces cut out, and they will look really cute put together as is, but you can really add a lot of dimension just by adding some color. I've been working on the purple ones here, and adding a little shadow and highlight makes a huge difference. I'm going to zoom in a little closer and show you kind of how to do this very easily. It doesn't matter what you're using for a coloring medium. I'm using distress crayons because I never really got that much use out of them. Actually, this is even a Target cheapo generic one. And I always felt kind of bad about that I had them in my stash and I never really was able to use them to their full advantage. So I'm going to use those today. But you could use chalk pastels, watercolor crayons, oil pastels, whatever you have. So basically, I like to do the edges, add a little bit of the crayon and blend it in. And then for the highlight, I'm just going to take a white distress crayon because it is kind of transparent, and just kind of add that in and blend it. I just love how much brighter and poppier they look once you add the color to them, and all it is just a little swipe of the crayon, and sometimes I'll take a spray bottle and I'll just spray off to the edge of my craft mat, and I'll dip my finger in it, and that will just help these distress crayons blend, because I did an experiment where I added all the color to all my shapes and then tried to blend them. They dry really quickly, but actually that's kind of nice, because if I'm trying to like stack things up and glue things next to each other, I know it's not gonna like be greasy for too long and then keep my glue from sticking. So so do that to all of your die cut shapes, and then what I recommend you do is stamp your sentiments. So you want to use the same colors, so use scraps that you've used to cut these out of. Like this one right here, check this out. I thought, you know what? How about I make this look like a tea bag? So you could hand cut that, no problem. I had a tag die, so I just used that. But to make it look a little bit fancier, since I'm not going to be able to mat this because I didn't have a die that was bigger and it was already getting kind of large, I'm simply going to do some of this yellow on the edges. And I mean, you could do another color if you wanted to, but I'm just kind of staying tone on tone to keep it simple. Use a clean finger and just blend that crayon, or it could be chalk or it could be oil pastel. It doesn't matter, it's whatever you have. And I just made sure, since I'm using a water media, that I stamped with a waterproof ink, such as my Ranger Archival. So look at that versus this. It's just tone on tone, but to me, I think it looks a lot more fancy and special. Okay, now let's take all these elements and put them together on a card. I chose a Kraft card base because I thought it would look nice with all these kind of pastel, kind of halfway pastel, halfway bright colors. Anytime I'm using either a background that I have watercolored so it's kind of warped, or I've embossed, I like to use a lot of adhesive. And you can use either, you know, your ATG adhesive, whatever your favorite double-sided tape is, or you can use a hot glue gun. But you want a lot of adhesive anytime you have a bumpy paper you're trying to stick down, and embossed paper is bumpy. And I'm talking pressure embossed because, like, you know, you don't have as much contact area, so you want to make sure you've got plenty of adhesive, and press that really well in. And I chose the background that we had done with the patina, and then sprinkling on the rust. and we're going to glue down some elements here. So what I did is actually, since I made so many like stamped images and cut them out and colored them, I had options. So I could add an extra teacup if I wanted to. I can add an extra macaroon. I have those options. So when I'm gluing down, I do like to use hot glue because we're going onto a bumpy surface, and I'm going to glue just to the bottom because that will give me a little bit of space for tucking if things don't match up exactly. Because like I added an extra bottom cut because I figured why not? I've got the extra pieces to play with. So not only am I using up all of that paper, I am able to, you know, make a card with a little more impact. So I'm just going to piece all these back together. That's a great thing about stamps. You never have to worry about running out of a particular design because you can just stamp another one. I'll put that one on top. Before I put that one on top, I want to cut a little slit right there. I'll just bring my mat right over here because I want to have a space where my tea bag string can go. So I'm just going to make a little slit right there. And for my tea bag string, I'm going to use some baker's twine. And I thought this purple would look nice because we do have some purple. And you only need maybe like, I don't know, 5 or 6 inches. Probably not even that much. And we're just going to tuck that right in that slit like that. Pull it to the back. All right, set this out of the way. And I'm going to put my glue right over that string. Because remember, we cut our tag out to look kind of like a tea bag. So this will kind of tie the whole design together. So I'm going to nestle that right in there. Just scooch it in a little bit so it doesn't hang over the side. There we go. And then I'm going to staple the tea bag to it so it looks like a real tea bag. So I've got a stapler here, just a regular office stapler. If you had a mini stapler, it would look even more realistic. And it's okay if the string sticks out a little bit because it is, you know, it'll smush down into your card, into your envelope. You could even make it like... That's kind of cute. You could tack down the loop with some glue if you want to, or just leave it. I'd probably just leave it. Now with the macaroons, the way that they're stamped, you've got one that's kind of tipped up, you've got one that's on its side there, and then you have one that sits on its own on top. I think is that one right there. So that's how the stamp goes, right? But because we are because we're doing this our own, and we've, you know, stamped extra things, and, you know, maybe our card isn't going to fit it that way perfectly, we can actually do our macaroons differently. So instead of putting it on like this for this card, where it looks all right, but it seems to be kind of, it seems to be, I don't know, maybe a little bulky there, we could also stack them up, or we could just add another one on top like that. I actually kind of like that. I'll show you this version where I stacked it up because I think that looks kind of cool too. And then here on this coffee one, using some of the other shapes, I did that little stack like that. So it just depends on how your particular card that you're working on needs to be filled up and what kind of space you have. I actually kind of like this, so I think that's how I'm going to glue it down. I will do one piece at a time. And if you don't like to use hot glue, like maybe it's just a little bit, you know, you feel a little bit like you might burn yourself, then use just like a thick and tacky glue or some other glue that's kind of thick and slow drying. Zip Dry is another good glue. That one's by Beacon. That one dries pretty slowly, and if you get some seepage, you can kind of roll up that glue, kind of roll it off your project after it dries. We'll want that to be over there. But it's so much fun, and you have all these options, and that's just paper from my scrap bin, which is really nice because I love to use up the leftovers. And there you have it. And if you find out that you have a bunch of leftovers, that's a great opportunity to make up some tags or bookmarks. That would be a cute gift tag on a present, or you could even put it on a card front for a card in the future. I'll show you these ideas one more time. So much fun. These would be really fun to color, but even if you don't have a lot of time to do a lot of coloring, you can still make up a batch of tags just by doing that simple highlighting and shading technique. I want to thank you so much for watching today. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and visit our sponsor, topflightstamps.com. I'll have all of the products linked in the video description so you can find them easily. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, happy crafting!